If you're looking at leaked specs or a specs wish list for the Nintendo Switch 2, you might see Hall Effect joysticks. Or maybe you bought a third-party controller in the last 2 years. Hall Effect is everywhere. Why? How much does it actually change the game? Probably the largest design flaw in the original Nintendo Switch was the thumbstick in the Joy-Con. For the most part, it performed just fine. It just had a tendency to deteriorate very rapidly. This led to widespread Joy-Con drift, which affected millions of Switch owners. This opened people's eyes up to the potential issues with traditional joysticks. See, most joysticks have two potentiometers in them, one for the X-axis and one for the Y-axis. And moving that joystick around is read by a change in voltage on each potentiometer. If you have a cheap or bad potentiometer, the physical bits inside could rub against each other. This will obviously deteriorate over time, and this is exactly the issue with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. There's physical bits in there that could grind away. What's left is a joystick that has a mind of its own. There seems to be an opportunity in the market now. People are looking for a solution, a joystick that will never drift. And that proposed solution is called the Hall Effect joystick. And that seems to have stuck. Get it? Stick? Stuck? Forget it. It's not new. Famously, the Dreamcast had Hall Effect sticks in there. It's also been used for other analog inputs like triggers. The reason this sounds so good to people is that there's no potentiometer in there. It uses magnets to read the change in the electrical current. This means you rely less on things rubbing in there. The less rubbing, the less deteriorating over time.
See, there's still moving parts in it. It still has an X and a Y axis. It's just not physically grinding on the board here. That's the only difference. This plastic can still wear out.
Now, controller manufacturers can put on the box, no drift, and magnets. No drift is a bit misleading. Bad Hall Effect sticks do exist, and those could definitely lead to some drift. Everything gets shitty eventually. Theoretically, good Hall Effect sticks should last longer than good potentiometer sticks. But you could have great potentiometer sticks that last you decades. The problem with the Nintendo Switch joystick isn't that they use potentiometers, it's that they used bad potentiometers, and the cheap plastic in there rubbed away really quickly. This Hall Effect marketing definitely worked. There are now tons of Hall Effect controllers out there in the wild. Every time I talk about a new controller or there's a new handheld on the market, everybody says, I'm not buying this thing unless it has Hall Effect sticks and an OLED screen, but that's a topic for another video. This sort of mentality means that they don't even care if the sticks are bad Hall Effect sticks. They just want to hear the word Hall Effect. It's 2 words. And that's crazy, don't you think? Does the Nintendo Switch 2 need Hall Effect sticks? No. Would it be cool if it had Hall Effect sticks? I don't know. It just needs good sticks. If they're Hall Effect, that really doesn't mean that much to me. But I'm actually glad that the Hall Effect, or Hall Sensing, this is interchangeable, I'm glad that that's gaining notoriety because there are some really great applications for Hall Effect technology, not just joysticks. Remember, they've been used in analog triggers before. Imagine if every button was an analog trigger. A normal button is just binary. It's either on or it's off. That's it. Nothing else. An analog button would be capable of much, much more than that. This concept recently got picked up by keyboard manufacturers. A keyboard with 60 analog triggers on it? Sounds a bit excessive, right? But this means we can do some really cool stuff with it. Even fight stick makers are scrambling to implement the Hall Effect. And this is somewhat controversial because these revolutionary implementations are getting banned all over the place. Why? Is it really that much of a game changer? Or has the gaming community lost all sense? Get it? Hall sense. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. The internet's down again. That's no problem at all. I always use the neighbor's Wi-Fi. Jimmy's? His public network? Is that safe? Yeah, man, I have an AI firewall. Check this out. Wait, I've seen this one before. VPNs can help you change your location so that you can access content that might otherwise be blocked in your country, but VPNs can also help you encrypt your data so that nobody on your network can see what you're doing, not even your neighbors or your ISP. Surfshark One gets you their VPN, private web search, data leak alerts, and their antivirus. Turn it off! Turn it off! I can't know how! Kill me! Your world is too painful for me! There's no risk to trying Surfshark, and they offer a free 30-day money-back guarantee. So go to surfshark.com/den and get 4 extra months of Surfshark. Well, I think we all learned a valuable lesson today. Oh, you learned something. Oh, did you actually learn something this time? God damn it. So in the past, I've done Hall effect mods on both the Nintendo Switch and the Steam Deck. They're fairly simple mods. You're just swapping out the joystick module. But the joystick you end up with isn't necessarily better than a stock joystick. In my testing, they certainly weren't worse. The sticks seem to be just as accurate as a regular stick. But if your joystick isn't faulty, why would you replace it? A lot of people were instantly buying these mod kits and just ripping open their Joy-Con and slopping in the new module. Why? Is this like a preventative measure? Joy-Con are notoriously a huge pain in the ass to open up. You're willing to potentially rip one of your ribbon cables just so you can say that there's Hall effect sticks in there? Why not just wait until something breaks before you then go ahead and fix what ain't broke? You know what I mean? The Hall effect sticks literally don't provide any functional benefit over a good potentiometer stick. Only do this if you've got a real drifting problem, which I'm sure a lot of people do. That being said, there's nothing wrong with getting a controller that has Hall effect sticks in it already. Companies like 8-Bit Do. I know it, I've been saying it for years and I still get it messed up. They've been putting Hall effect sticks in all of their newest controllers. I'm a big fan of the 8-Bit Do Ultimate controller. That controller came out right when Hall effect was all the rage. It's just a great all-around controller, and the sticks are very nice. Even the newer versions of the SN30 Pro, a controller that I've loved for years for its portability, now has Hall effect sticks in it, which might make it a better candidate for tossing in your bag. But I still wouldn't treat it like shit just because the sticks are Hall effect. You could still ruin those sticks. Gully Kit was kind of the first to ride the Hall effect train, at least in relation to the Nintendo Switch. They have their King Kong controller. It's a pretty decent controller, but it's a perfect example of why Hall effect doesn't automatically equal good. Their first go around with Hall effect still had some calibration issues. I'm sure they've ironed things out by now. This new one just physically feels way nicer. This new version 3 feels pretty solid, but I haven't used it for nearly long enough to formulate a valid opinion on it. At least the 8-Bit Do one comes with its own software. So if you have any drifting problems, you can just increase the dead zones on the software. This will limit the drifting, even on a regular joystick. It doesn't have to be a Hall effect for that. While looking into things for this video, I found this Reddit post by a user who did a pretty in-depth breakdown of Hall effect controllers. He lays out exactly what Hall effect modules these controllers use. He puts 8-Bit Do and Gully Kit in the avoid category because he doesn't like the Hall effect modules that they use. Instead, for Nintendo Switch, he's recommending this ugly abomination. I think 8-Bit Do is fine. I've had a fine experience with those. If you're susceptible to drift and you don't mind the way this thing looks, maybe look into this one. If you are susceptible to drift, I'd ask, what are you doing with your controllers? Stop just throwing them on the ground when you're done playing with them. Store them correctly, and maybe stop playing that one Mario Party minigame. What gets me more excited than Hall effect sticks is Hall effect buttons. Analog Hall effect triggers have been around for a long time. Xbox Elite controllers have Hall effect triggers. They register pressure sensitivity. You know, the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con and Pro controller do not have analog triggers. It doesn't look like the new Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Con will have them either. You can see there doesn't seem to be a lot of travel distance there. They seem like they have button switches. which is a shame because the current binary ZL and ZR buttons break some GameCube games, like Mario Sunshine. So let's take that idea and move it one step forward. What if every button on the controller acted like a trigger did? What if all of them had Hall effect buttons? The PlayStation 2 had analog buttons. I remember each button did like 3 different things in Metal Gear Solid 3. But those buttons weren't Hall effect, they were just pressure sensitive. But the applications are very similar. Pause. We're getting into the weeds here. We're gonna roll it back just a little bit so that I can explain these really complicated controllers to you and why I use them. People already don't like playing 2D games with a thumbstick. Using a D-pad makes your inputs way more deliberate. A controller like this takes it one step further. I have here a controller I've used for fighting games, but mostly retro games like Mario Maker. Each button on the left here is a direction on the D-pad. Separating directional buttons and moving them to each finger makes it a lot easier to be more deliberate with your presses. It's easier to be more accurate, no more misinputs. But since it's still just like a D-pad, you can't control how much velocity you have. You're just full sending it all the time, which is fine for most stuff that I would use it for anyway, but it's not fine for 2D games or games like Smash Brothers, where walking means you have completely different moves than you would if you were full sprinting. This controller is something I've used for Smash. I know it's confusing. Smash requires a lot more buttons than a traditional fighting game because of the dual analog sticks. But this controller also has a modifier key programmed in that will allow you to walk while you're holding that modifier button. It's programmed to be the fastest walk that you can do before it registers as a run. It's kind of perfect, but it's still kind of binary. It would be nice in some situations to have a little more control over that movement. Maybe you want to position yourself in just the right spot on the map. This controller just came out. It's by Renee Customs, called the Orca Controller. It's essentially the same idea as the last controller I just showed you, but this one has Hall effect switches on the left side. This allows you to control your walking speed. Lightly press for a walk, full sprint for a run. Now, this can also help you with certain characters who require precise directional inputs. Don't say it! Just use the thumbs. Don't say it. That's boring. Shut up. This applies the same sort of deliberateness as using like a D-pad or an all-button controller, but makes it a little more versatile. It puts the analog back into it, making it almost the perfect controller. This controller is still being worked on. You can get it right now, but it currently only functions as a GameCube controller. X input mode is not out yet. There also currently isn't a software yet to reconfigure the keys, which makes it very hard for me to use. But there are some basic adjustments you can make. I would just wait for the configuration software to be done unless you're comfortable with this layout. This proprietary software is important because I've looked up and down on all the different open source fight stick softwares, and there are none that currently let you configure Hall effect switches to work like analog switches. I've looked everywhere. Some Smash people hate these box style controllers. They think it gives you such a competitive edge that it's cheating. I am definitely worse when I use these types of controllers. I just think they're more fun and way more ergonomic. It's like typing on a keyboard. I think most people who hate these types of controllers just need something to be mad at when they lose. That being said, I understand the need to ban something that allows you to play the game in a way that wasn't originally intended by the developers. Which brings me to my next banned device, this keyboard. So both Razer and Wulff both have keyboards that have analog switches in them now. Wulff has Hall effect switches and Razer has optical switches, but they serve a similar analog function. At the base level, this allows you to set the actuation point to be whatever you want. You can make it a hair trigger if you want. You can just lightly touch the W key and you're full sprinting forward. I ended up with the Razer one because it had next day shipping and I wanted to get this video done. I kind of wish I went with the Wulff because I just think it looks nicer. This Razer one is a bit uggo. I tried to recap it with some keycaps that I had laying around. They're XDA profile, so there's no curve, and typing on it feels terrible because of that, but at least it looks nice. I'll get better ones eventually. The switches are a bit weird looking. They don't look like normal switches. They have this bar going across them. They also feel weirdly stiffer than what I'm used to. But I got used to them pretty quick. I typed this whole script on here with the XDA profile and everything. I did use the delete key a lot though. There are a few features that made this worth checking out for me. The analog switches allow you to have all these different control modes. The first and most popular mode is FPS Rapid Trigger, which will make just the WASD keys act as a hair trigger. You can set the actuation point to be whatever you want. Setting the actuation point makes the button trigger quicker, but Rapid Trigger makes it so when you let go, it automatically cuts off whatever the action is, and you can set the point of where you let go. So these two in tandem make your inputs faster. You can also further customize this to set the actuation point of any key on the keyboard, all of them if you want. You can make everything a hair trigger if you really want. You can make just the WASD keys a hair trigger and everything else really hard to press if you're afraid of misinputs. The second setting I didn't even know about is analog WASD. This is really cool. It acts similar to the last controller we just talked about. It forces WASD to be read as an analog stick. You can also set other keys on the keyboard to be read as Xbox buttons. So if you're playing, say, Mario 64 with a keyboard, you can do these slow walks and precise movements. You're not limited to full sprinting in 8 cardinal directions. You have the full range of motion you would have on an analog stick, except now with analog buttons. Oh God, I forgot that. I forgot that I was in this game. Oh Jesus. This is pretty awesome. It fixes one of the issues that I have with keyboard movement. You normally only get 8 cardinal directions you can move in. Analog buttons would theoretically allow you to move in any direction, depending on how far down you press each button. And it's relatively intuitive to use. The issue here is that these keys that you're using analog inputs for have to be read as a controller. So it's registering the WASD keys as the thumbstick on an Xbox controller. This can break some stuff. For example, it works pretty great in Marvel Rivals. I had a lot more range of motion, which can be really helpful, but you do get this pinging sound constantly because the game keeps thinking you're switching between keyboard and mouse and a controller setup over and over and over again. It's not exactly a viable option for a game like this. Valorant doesn't even allow you to use a controller, so this setting just wouldn't work at all. It's a cool feature in concept, and it can be cool in some very niche situations, but there's a lot of work to be done still. The last and most controversial feature on this Razer keyboard is what they call Snap Tap, because Razer always has their own proprietary names for things, but it's called SOCD everywhere else. This is something that's been around for years. The fighting game community has been wrestling with this for years. So it's been really interesting seeing PC esports players all of a sudden freaking out about this. Capcom banned SOCD back in their tournaments in 2023. SOCD stands for simultaneously opposing cardinal directions. In a game that usually has a joystick, like a fighting game, you physically cannot press left and right at the same time. But what if you were to, say, I don't know, use an all-button style or a box-style controller? Well, now you can press 2 opposing directions at once. In a lot of games, pressing both directions at once does nothing. They cancel each other out. No inputs are read. In Marvel vs. Capcom 3, it allows you to block both directions at the same time. I can see why they'd want to ban that. What SOCD and Snap Tap do is they allow you to choose what happens when you press both directions at the same time. The most popular use case right now for this is to just prioritize the last used input. It will override the previous input. So if you're holding left and you suddenly start holding right, it will essentially let go of left for you. This could theoretically lead to slightly faster inputs. In a game like Valorant or Counter-Strike, pressing both directions at the same time stops your movement completely. The inputs cancel each other out. I do this all the time. It makes it really easy to stop moving. And in those games, you cannot be moving when you shoot. You're way more accurate when you're standing still. So you want to kind of constantly be moving. And when you're ready to shoot, you can just press the opposing direction to instantly stop moving. This is how the game is wired, so it's intended to be played like this. If you have one of these keyboards, you can change what happens when you press both directions at once. People have been changing it so that the most recent input wins. This makes you just automatically switch directions. This is controversial because for a split second while you're changing directions, you can shoot perfectly accurately. This allows you to shoot straight and keep moving. If you perfect this technique, it can be very deadly to the other team. This is seen as totally broken, and it was immediately banned by Counter-Strike when Wulff and Razer implemented this in their keyboards. You can't even use this setting at home playing online. It doesn't even matter if you're in a tournament or not. Your account can get reprimanded for using this feature. I hear it's a lot more egregious in Counter-Strike. Maybe that window where you're super accurate when you're switching directions, maybe that window is a little bigger. But in Valorant, it's very short, it's really hard to perfect, and I'm kind of just really used to having it so that when you press the opposite direction, it stops you dead in your tracks. I like playing that way. I'm not gonna play like this. I'm also just really bad at this. So having to rewire my whole play style to start playing around with this feature, that's just not gonna happen. I'm 35 years old. Optimum has a whole video on this, and that video kind of blew the whistle on this feature. I don't play Counter-Strike. Maybe it's a lot worse than Counter-Strike. He seems to like it in Overwatch. I'll be leaving this feature off for now. I don't like it. SOCD and Snap Tap also have nothing to do with Hall effect technology. They just so happen to be in keyboards that also so happen to have Hall effect technology in them. SOCD is something you can enable in all sorts of all-button controllers, and even some keyboards that don't have Hall effect in them at all. Even controllers with regular binary buttons. This random keyboard I cobbled together has SOCD thanks to some open source firmware I have on it. Again, I leave it off because I would just rather have the inputs work as originally intended. Also, it would change nothing for my Mario Maker gameplay. My thesis for this video was to just show you what everyone was getting all hot and bothered about. Everybody loves screaming about Hall effect sticks, but they're equating Hall effect to mean good stick, and that's not necessarily true. My argument is that Hall effect does not automatically equal good stick, but Hall effect does have a lot of other applications that I think are very interesting, not just for sticks. Will the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Con have Hall effect sticks? You know, who cares? Are Hall effect buttons really cool? You bet your ass they are. Yes, this was just an excuse to talk about my two new keyboards and wrap it in a nice, neat little Nintendo Switch 2 bow. Did I do a good job? Did I get you interested in these buttons? These buttons are cool, right? It's pretty cool buttons here. What do you guys think about Hall effect sticks and the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Con, but more importantly, these Hall effect buttons that are really cool, and I hope to see in a lot more stuff? Leave it in the comments below, at me on Twitter, any and all this other social media garbage. I stream on twitch.tv/WulffDen, but also here on YouTube sometimes. The next stream might be the Lenovo Legion Go S. I think that's coming out this week. Head on over to WulffDenApparel.com, get yourself a little mug for your coffee. And of course, the most important thing you can do to help support this channel, subscribe right here and share this video with a friend. A friend who told you once, I'm not buying that, it doesn't have Hall effect sticks in it. Have a good week.